Hi, welcome. Lori Morse with Create to Heal Studio and 5 Element Creative Healing. We're going to do a quick little kind of overview on how our brain works as a human being. And I have a lot to share with you and some stuff to show you. So I have a lot of notes. So forgive me for looking at them, but I just do not want to lose track of all the important points that I want to share with you. There's a link near this video that is has a worksheet and a smaller version of this. If you would like to go grab that, you can pause the video, go do that if you haven't already. You don't have to, but you might find it a little more helpful. You can also take notes on the sheet that's smaller than this, because I'm going to say things that aren't on that sheet, so you might want to grab those notes. Okay, so what we're basically going to be talking about is a version of neuroplasticity, the way our brain has the capacity to change brain tracks. So, and we'll be talking about what all of that means. But everything I'm going to tell you and share with you is based in neuroscience research. So I'm just going to say that up front so you know that's it's all backed up by that. So, and we've got to talk about the brain because she pretty much drives the bus, right? And she presses the gas for go if it feels safe, but she references everything from the past in terms of what makes it feel safe to say, to press the gas pedal or not, which is a very small viewpoint, right? We're going to talk about how her point of view is quite narrow compared to the possibility of view. And so it's really hard to get her to press the gas, right? Most of the time she's braking. And what I mean by that is if you say, I'm going to try something new, or I'm going to try to change a habit or a pattern or an addiction or anything like that, you've probably tried to do this before. You get a little bit of a ways, but then the brakes are on and you're back into the old groove again, and it's frustrating. I know, trust me, I know. So it's kind of like our lower human brain is the warden and we're the captor. We're like the one in prison, and so we're going to create a relationship. Actually, we're going to be talking about how to get out of prison in general, but just to give you that sort of idea about how the lower human ego, mind, brain, that part of our brain is the one who kind of runs the show, decides what you get to do and what you can't do. So simply put, people get past. So if you try to do something new, we just were talking about this, if you try to do something new, that the initial excitement of getting to where you want to go, getting to your intention or to your desire or your wish, the excitement gets you a first, few steps on the journey, right? And then if that excitement, or as that excitement wears down, then that's when you're going to get kicked back into the old road, so to speak. And that's the part that is pretty frustrating. And so simply put, the people who are able to get past those initial few steps and keep walking toward their intention or their desire are ones who actually lay new brain tracks. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And let's see here. I like this analogy of a hiking trail. So let's just say you're a hiker or you take walks. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can use your own example for this. But if there's two different pathways and one leads to one destination, let's say in the hiking case it's a mountain, and in the other trail leads, in the hiking example, to a river. And let's say you always take the mountain trail, right? But you want to go see what the river's all about. So when you're at the point where you choose your trail, you cannot take the mountain trail and get yourself to the river. Let's say in this example they're in opposite directions and they do not lead to the same end goal, the same destination. So that makes sense, and that's reasonable. Like, we don't question that, but because we don't see our brain and it isn't laid out for us like hiking trail signs are, we don't realize that we keep taking the same trail hoping to get to a different destination. So it's a little bit wacky, that, isn't it? So and here's why this is important, because if you have something you want to heal in your body, if you are looking to be a more expressive person on any level, if you would like to exchange like if you feel like a tense and kind of, yeah, like a tight, tense person, and you would rather have ease. If you're looking for the abundance that feels like is yours to enjoy in this life, the abundance, good, and a plentiful nature that is really every human being is deserving of that. It's like our divine birthright. If you're looking for either if you're looking for more love on whatever level, whether it's romantic or more friends or just to deepen your current, relationships, and it doesn't feel like you can get past a certain point in your own heart, then this is why this conversation might be valuable to you. So stick with me. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of things that have to do with the neuroscience, the neuroplasticity. And the first is that there's a phenomenon in the brain called a default mode network. And I'll show you where it is on the graphic part. But for now, I just want to tell you about this default mode network. It kind of acts like a traffic cop in all of the brain, not just in the part that shows up, which is in this wall between our higher intelligence and our small mind. We'll come to that in a minute. And it's a kind of a bossy traffic cop. And it is constantly deciding which narratives to reference, and almost always those narratives, as I said earlier, are based in the past, right? And this is the part of our brain that's the small ego part. It's the small self. It's the little one that some people refer to it. And it's very much lower self referential. So it refers to itself constantly, all the time, constantly. What does this mean to me? What does this mean about me? And it's a safety mechanism. So I'm not making any of this bad or wrong. It's just how we operate. So it's just good to know, so we have access to other options instead of the default mode constantly kind of running the show. And so this is another kind of interesting thing to know, is that this part of our brain is the part that writes and enforces our destructive narratives. It tends toward excessive rigidity regarding these destructive narratives, meaning it takes a lot for the brain to release and soften on those destructive narratives. There are ways to do that, and we will be talking about that. And the creative healing process has to do with that. Meditation is another one, just to kind of give you, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And let's just say on a spectrum of rigidity, like some people are like, well, I don't have that, like the spectrum of rigidity, as far as what's being researched right now, is on the far end, one of the farther ends, not that this is the end all, but behaviors like anxiety, depression, and addiction show up. And then there's worry and doubt and fear, and, that shows up sometimes, So it's a spectrum of maybe even skepticism and resentment, and they're the loops that well. They're the places that kind of sneak up behind you when you thought you had dealt with it. That it's those loops that fall along this narrative. Now, here's what's interesting about this default mode network, is it's the same place in the brain, which means that anxiety, depression, addiction, worry, high fear, all those things come from the same place in the brain, but just with different symptoms, different types of expressions. So one person might be a high anxiety person. Another person might be easy to be depressed person. Another person might be, really struggling with addiction. Another person might be a worrier. I have women tell me all the time, oh, I'm just a worrier. That's just how it is. My mom was a worrier. I'm a worrier. And she says it as if that's just the way it is and there is no other option. But the thing to know is that there is another option. The only reason that worry is so predominant in her default pattern is because she's traveled that road for a long time and the groove is deep, but it doesn't mean it's the only road she has. It just seems that way when she's on that road. Like she doesn't feel like there's really an option except for to ride the worry out. And that's what we're going to be sort of bringing to light, that there are other options. And I know because I've lived it personally, and I've worked with hundreds of women who have the same experience in their way. Everyone has their own experience. These things don't show up exactly the same for every human being. the underlying foundation of the fact that there is a default mode network and that we do have different parts of our brain and that there is an intelligence in our cells, all that's the same for all human beings, but how it gets expressed is different for all of us, as different as our thumbprints, right? So all kinds of different myriad of formations. So, right. So the reason I say all of this is because things like a creative healing process can lower the rigidity of that wall for long enough for there to be cohesion in the brain, so that there can actually be an access to all parts of our brain. When the rigidity is high and when we aren't engaging in anything that will allow that wall to soften for a flow back and forth, then we just remain stuck. We remain in the rigid states and in the old narratives, the old patterns, the old beliefs. They're all false. The old stories, the lies that we've somehow gathered along the way. And this doesn't make anyone wrong or bad. It just means that it's actually part of the lower mind programming to actually easily click into these kinds of stories and lies and false beliefs until we make a conscious choice to do it another way. And that's actually part of the sort of the game board of life, so to speak. So, and meditation is also very much researched too. Like they can actually see the rigidity in a long-term meditator is gone, like that. Maybe I shouldn't say gone because that's not fair, but is in a very soft, low, almost indiscernible state, so that there's cohesion in the brain. Not so in, say, a brain that they look at that's in active anxiety or depression or addiction or high worry. That they can see the rigidity of this network easily. So since we're talking about this, let's put what we're talking about in this graphic form. And don't forget that you have a smaller downloadable version of this that you can take notes on if you want. And then there's also a worksheet as part of what you can download because I'll tell you how we're going to actually use this once we're done with our time here together. Okay, so that's that. Let's see. Right, so the purpose of all this, yeah, well, let's go to the graphic first. So here is our mind, right? So this is the inner circle, and this line that I've already referred to is the rigid wall between our higher intelligence and our lower ego-based mind. Now you'll notice that our higher intelligence has access in and out constantly, and let's just in a minute talk about what that actually means, but this part of our mind does not. So then the next circle is our body, and it's a small radius, because our body, our physical self is actually a small percentage of our whole self, right? So our whole self is thought to be about 96% non-physical, and then our physical is about 4%. And so we put all of our focus on this 4% physical, right? And we think that's all there is to our beingness, to our system. And it's so much more than that. So, and then on the ring, this ring here, this is like our life. This is where we raise our family. These are all the places that we choose to engage our impact, our contribution. It's where we feel lured by our purpose in life. And I do want to say, and this is on your worksheet, that what's that word I use? Let me just grab this. Yeah, like as a human being, our number one imperative is to keep the species alive and propagated, right? But our number one purpose and prime directive as a conscious human being is an integrated self. So that's another reason we're having this conversation, because living and having most of our choices coming from this part of our brain is not integrated. But when we learn how to open ourselves up and integrate, then we're operating from a much bigger field. And I will have you know that unified field, so to speak, is of the essence of love. So it's the yearning of every human heart to access that field. And it is so painful and frustrating to beat our heads up against this wall constantly and not have access to the love that we know is there. And this isn't romantic love. This isn't the love from magazines or movies. It's the true essence of our connection to the whole, that vibration that we end up feeling through our senses is love, right? And it may or may not have to do with a romantic channel or but it is love, and that's what everyone looks for. So if you're alive, that is a yearning you have in your heart. And then the outer ring is the field, right? This is the cosmic creative field, the life force. We can call it chi, we can call it love, we can call it source. I mean, there's a lot of names that we can call it, and that part is less important than the part that this is who we are. This is part of us. I've put on the outer outside the universe, because I mean, there's multiverses and galaxies and that whole thing, but we just need to talk about our own whole self. And when I say whole self, I would have you know that you already have the brain tracks in your brain ready to be activated, that will lift you above the lower self, that will connect you into your whole self, that will cause you to be a more integrated self than you maybe are right now. And you don't have to figure out where those will come from. They're already there. They just need to be activated, and they need to be awakened. I mean, that is actually the definition of awakening, right? Is opening up to all of this access, all of this wholeness. Our small mind would have us believe that we are so imperfect that we will never, ever reach perfection. All of our faults, all of the things that aren't perfect. This is why magazines drive women crazy, because that bar of perfection is so unattainable. What I'm talking about is a version of imperfect wholeness, a version of wholeness that is so much more, that permeates us so much more than our small minds drive for a perfection it will never have, that it quiets that mind. So let me say that again. A version of wholeness that is so permeating to who we are, that this small mind's imperfections and judgments and criticisms of imperfection you can't even hear it anymore. So wholeness is programmed into every cell. It's in already brain tracks available to be activated in your brain, and neurons to be in communication with every part of your body. So I'm inviting you to wholeness. I'm inviting you into that, if you will. So let's just decode a little bit of that, a little bit of this. Let's talk about this part first. Well, we've already been talking about it, but let's just talk about this next, I guess. So this what I'm about to say is in varying degrees for everyone. A lot of people have already done a lot of work on this, whether they know it's about this exact default mode network or not, but they've brought themselves into other brain tracks that are of a higher level, so to speak, than the lower mind. And we all have, as long as we're alive, we will always have more to activate, more stories to sort of bring home to the heart of wholeness, to be stitched back into love versus being separate, which the mind uses as ways to beat ourselves up and take ourselves down. So we all have a version of this, and it just shows up a little different, but I'm going to talk about generalities here that most human beings have, whether you've tended to them or not. If you have, great, but you'll recognize yourself for having tended to them. But a lot of us don't have what I'm about to talk about, like wired. So that's the reason for us having this conversation. So the very first wound of a human being is the idea that they are separate from source. And if you think about it, if this is a closed system, right? This is a closed system, whereas when we live from our whole brain, then we're actually in an open system with life, right? We actually are literally breathing with life. We are being breathed by the cosmic breath. But when we hunker down and we go in to this part of our being, then it feels like it's a closed system, and we very much feel disconnected from source. And we are, right? If we're closed up in here, there's no access to source. So we feel very disconnected from source. And And that's that's simply nothing more than an error in thought, an error in this level of thinking, right? And the other thing, the other quality about this part of our mind, I'm telling you these things so you recognize, oh, I'm here, and I'm going to give you tools on how to be more here. And so when you recognize this, you have choice instead of just being constantly shoved into this dark cell. It's a prison cell, right? So the other part is it's a very fear-based reality from this part of our mind. It's fear. It's all about being unworthy, unlovable, and it's hard to access love when this system is closed and love is way out here, right? So a lot of the self-love work is so beautiful, but if it doesn't address this, then it ends up being even more frustrating than before starting it, because it's hard to get this access, right? So this part of our brain, this part of our beingness believes they are imperfect. Remember, we talked about that perfection, strives for perfection, but doesn't believe it will ever attain it because it believes that their divinity, that divinity in general, has failed them. It's an interesting consideration because underlying all of our stuff, so to speak, is a belief that it's not possible. We're skeptical that it is, because in the end, living in this space, it feels like our divinity has failed us, right? So that's a big piece to chew on. This part of our mind tends to be really serious about all this other stuff I just said. It is serious about being imperfect. It is serious about its separation from source. And it is serious about fear. And remember, the prime directive of this part of our mind is safety. So it is serious about being fearful of new things, because who knows if that's safe or not. Everything you've done up until now has kept you alive, and that's good enough. There's no need to try anything new or different, because how does this part of our mind know it will be safe enough to keep us alive? That's the prime directive of that part of the mind. It's good to know that. So this part of our mind, in her directive to keep you safe, is constantly creating protective mechanisms about all this stuff, right? So a protective mechanism is, you can't try being creative. What if I can't see everything that's going on when you're over here, and that feels unsafe to me. So we're going to lock down. We're going to lock down your creativity. We're going to lock down you trying to lose those 25 pounds. We're going to lock down you trying to move across the country and try something totally new and different. I mean, there's a list of things that you maybe would like to do, but it gets really shut down kind of fast. So, and that's not true of everything. I know you have moved past that, but you did it because you allowed for there to be new brain tracks for something that was really, really important to you. Let's see, what else? Oh, this part of our brain is highly critical, hypercritical, and hyperjudgmental of self and others. I mean, we all know that, right? Like you could have had the most delicious and blissful meditation or yoga class or, anything of that nature. And then you get in your car and you think, oh, this is how I'm going to roll today. This is so good. I want to be this. I want to live this, right? And the first person that passes your car once you're on the road, it turns everything on a dime, right? You're back to, you jerk, whatever it is that happens, but right into judgment and criticism. And it's like, wow, how does that happen? This is how it happens, right? And this part has little access to forgiveness of self, right? Remembering, because the core unconscious belief is that their separation is unforgivable. Their separation is unforgivable, like forevermore. So doomed to darkness forevermore. This is that little one part of us, right? I don't personally, I've never resonated with the inner child thing. If that works for you, great. And if it doesn't, this is just the small part of us, the small self, right? Like it's not the part of us that knows it's lovable and is connected to the higher source of intelligence and has access to it at a breath, right? It's that smaller part that is stuck and locked in prison, right? I mentioned earlier, but this part of our brain has a very narrow point of view. It's pretty pinpoint, right? Very, very. It's like a pinhole. Whereas the view, if we knew this, is unlimited. It's vast. It's huge. I mean, this paper is containing these circles, but the view is way beyond that, dimensions beyond this. And we tend to live with a point of view that is that big, right? Like, are you ready to get out of that prison? I know that I just was so ready and I'm still breaking down the walls, right? So this is stuff that I have lived. So believe me, I know this path very well. And I know it with other women in terms of just guiding them through. Now, here's another important part of this, and we're almost done with this stuff, but this part of our mind is a master at co-opting and hijacking this part whenever it tries to sort of come online or counterbalance or, you know, be in harmony with, or, you know, whenever, like, you know, whenever we want to have this aspect of ourselves, we get it for a little while, right? But then this part is always scheming and reworking stories and reworking narratives so that it stays in the driver's seat. The design is that this part of our mind is in the driver's seat. This is the pilot, and this is the co-pilot. It's reversed in most people, right? With this as the pilot, access to everything. And this is the true part of us that keeps us safe in a physical world, and the logic part of us, brilliant mechanisms, not designed to drive the plane, not at all designed to be driving the bus, the boat, whatever mode of transportation you want to play with here. I've actually taken or had started this a while ago. Every time this part of my brain just reared her ugly head, I would just pretend I was taking the reins. Sometimes it's an oar, the oars, like the oars of the boat, and I just hand them to her. And I relax into enjoying the ride. Now, that does take a little practice. You know, there's some muscle building in this stuff, but it's worth every moment of your attention. So, and then the last part about this part of our mind, oh, let me just say one more thing. The stories and the lies and the beliefs and the narratives that are more destructive than not, that this part of our brain makes up, she can sometimes make them look so real and so good that it hijacks this part of our mind into sort of buying in, even though she knows better. But anyway, I just want you to know that. The last part is that this part of our mind hates to be in a beginner's mind place. So, you know, you can think of any time in your life where you've tried to start something new, and you have to be in a beginner's mind whenever we do something new. And this part of our brain doesn't like it. So she'll find whatever way she can to shut it down. So everyone has this. So if you have had many of these experiences, I just want you to know you're not alone, and there is a way out of this prison, and we are going to talk about that. One more list. And so what I want you to do with your worksheet, if you're willing, this is an invitation, is to just notice over the next days without judgment, right? This is an observation mode that you're going to be in. And you're going to notice what you are aware of, or what does become, you know, it to come to your awareness, that shows you some of your main ways that this part of your brain takes you out. And then just make a note of them, either in your journal or on the worksheet. But what we're doing is we're creating a conscious relationship with our stories, not to beat ourselves up or make us wrong, but so that we can do something with those stories, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so this part of our brain can start curating those brain tracks and a higher level of consciousness and life, you know, the experience of life. So some of the things that you might notice are tension, anxiety, I already mentioned, depression, addiction, defensiveness, worry, doubt, skepticism, cynicism, the tendency for the mind to spin, wanting to control, to-do lists, everything's on, you know, everything has to be controlled, fear of loneliness or isolation, either can lean into arrogance a little bit, entitlement even, or its opposite, which is too humble, you know, like, oh, no, not me. I you know, like that kind of thing. A victim stance is part of this, expression can be. A sense of failure, disappointment, feeling burnt out, impatient. This part of our body or our brain feels like a fraud. And it makes sense, right? She's trying to pretend that she's all of this, and she's not. I mean, that is a fraud, right? I mean, she's not really a fraud. She's just a scared little one. So when we understand it, we don't have to feel as much like a fraud, but that is where the feeling like a fraud comes from, is that part. So yeah, I already said, so what we're going to do is the whole point of identifying like where your stories, what your main themes are, is so that we can go in and start softening this rigidity so that there can be more cohesion and connection in your brain, and you have access to everything that you were designed to have access to in terms of being a human being in this life on planet Earth. And yeah, that is the scoop. That is the main thing. So once you have a little bit of awareness of that, then another video will guide you through what to do with that. But if you want to actually go in much deeper, I would like to invite you to a 5-week program that will actually we'll pick one thing, because we can't do everything in 5 weeks, but we'll pick one thing and we will knock that brain track out, and we will activate a brain track that is more in line with what you know your heart and soul's intention to be. And we will do that through creative healing processes that are fun and colorful and don't require a lot of supplies or time or setup or anything like that. I mean, you can do it as elaborate or simple as you choose, but the point is that the capacity of transformation and alchemizing our old stories and our old narratives through a creative healing process is researched, and it's brilliant. And as long as I've been in like this healing profession for 30 years, I have never found anything more impactful that has a long-lasting effect. And so, at this point, I'm like, I want to cut to the chase. I don't want to spend a decade or two in a therapist's office. Nothing against therapists. I'm married to one, a psychologist, but I want to cut to the chase, and I want to enjoy. I want to have a little more fun. Like sometimes this can be hard work, and I think sometimes this part of us shies away from it because it's hard. It can be hard. But when we're doing it in a way that she starts trusting, and creativity will prove that to her, then it becomes a little more, it's lighthearted, like our spirit can join in, and there's an enjoyment to it. And there's kind of like, I remember hearing this years ago, like people would say, oh yeah, when their stuff comes up, they're like, bring it on. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how I would ever do that. But now I know. Now I'm like, I have a place. I have a place in life, in physical life, which is either a journal page or a canvas or, wood panel, something like that, that can receive the stuff that's ready to transform. And it is ready if you're aware of it, just so you know, that you don't have to be afraid of it. You can just look at it and say, okay, it's ready. I would not have access to it. I would not be aware of it if it weren't ready to be put on the altar, so to speak, to be altered. And so that is what a canvas serves at. It's an altar, it's a portal, it's a substrate of transformation, and it works every single time. So in my view, it's like, why wouldn't I do it that way? So what else would I want to tell you about that? So you're going to identify the brain tracks that aren't serving. We'll restore the tracks that are already there, but we'll activate them. Remember, you have a blueprint for all of this already in your brain and in every cell of your being. We'll choose one area of your life to upgrade, and then we'll compost all those stories and beliefs and narratives that are destructive and not serving and really are outdated. They're old and they're outdated. They probably have been for a while. We just haven't known what to do with them, right? And you will you'll get some footing on your new brain track, and then you will feel like you'll notice that it's different than any other time because you're on firm ground and you feel your own firm footing, especially when it's in connection with life and nature and the fabric of the universe, which is love, and your own creative life force that's breathing you and pumping your blood and beating your heart and digesting your food right now as we're speaking, that you just don't have a relationship with because you can't get to it, right? And the good thing about this is you'll have this process for the rest of your life. You can do any number of transformational alchemizing processes with it, because you'll learn it once and then you'll have it. So I would just say, if this sounds like something that you've been hoping for, or kind of you're intrigued by it, then I'm going to invite you to go over to my love letter to you, an invitation to become a part of the 5-week program, and everything that you need to know about how it all will happen will be on that page. And so I hope that you choose to say yes and to my invitation, because once you do, you'll be in a sacred circle, a sacred container, and you will consciously begin to feel grace and creativity as a transformation tool for the things that are ready to be transformed in your life. Okay, so stay tuned for buttons, and I will meet you in the circle. Bye for now.